Other than just meeting you and knowing you were in Vietnam, and I believe, and you were a POW, is that right?
Right.
I don't really know anything else. So sort of just tell me your story. When did you go in country, and from where? You're an Aggie grad, right?
I graduated from A&M in 1960. Was in the Air Force. I was electronic warfare officer in the Air Force. I was stationed in my first operational base was in El Paso, Texas, at Biggs Air Force Base, which is now Biggs Army Airfield.
Right.
And about the time they closed that in 1966, my squadron from there transferred to Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico, which is just right up the road. Our mission was to fly targets for the anti-aircraft missiles training at Fort Bliss.
Yes, sir.
And so, they just moved up the road to Holloman Air Force Base, which is about 80 miles from El Paso, and, flew the missions out of there. But I moved to Duluth, Minnesota, and, quite a change from El Paso, Texas to Duluth, Minnesota. My first morning there was 30 below zero.
Oh, my goodness.
But anyway, I was there for just a short time. I was there for 10 months, and then one day the vice commander came down to my office and he said, "I got some orders for you. Go to Thailand." And so I went and investigated, and I was supposed to report to Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas on the 21st of November. This was on the 31st of October, so I had 3 weeks to get there. So
this was still in
1967, 66.
66, right?
Yeah, in fall of 66, and then I had 3 weeks pack up my family, and I brought them down to College Station and left them here, and then I went off to Nellis and trained. It was a very fast training program. They showed us the project that, well, it was begin with it was, they called it Project Wild Weasel, and what they did was they took the two-seated 105s and put an electronic warfare officer in the back seat, and it had special equipment to home in on the radar that guided the surface-to-air missiles. And that was the site that they launched the missiles from. The missiles, because of electronic restraints, the missiles had to be within, I think, 250 feet of the master control band. So, and similar to like an RS-232 cable can only be 100 feet. They had problems with sending data from the control center to the missile. So, everything was in close proximity, and we would home in on the radar that guided that. And we had strike missiles that would home in on that radar.
Right.
And of course, when that blew up, if you knocked the radar out, it put the missile site out of business.
Yeah.
Hopefully, some of the shrapnel would hit the missiles and blow it up too. But primarily, that was to get the radar. And then we carried cluster bombs to get if we found the site, actual location of the site.
Right.
Put cluster bombs on it. The cluster bomb was a canister, had 720 little bomblets in this canister. And you dropped it from the airplane, and the tail fins were canted so it would spin, and then after a certain number of seconds it would split open and scatter those little balls. And it would, if they were dropped right, it would cover an area about the size of a football field. And they were very lethal. They were originally designed to be an anti-personnel weapon, but missiles are very fragile, and just one of those little pellets in the missile, and that whole site goes up. And they were those SA-2s were liquid fueled, which meant they were fueled with hydrogen and oxygen, and it was very volatile. And they could only leave the fuel in the missiles, I think it was 20 minutes, and then they had to defuel them. So they had each side had 6 missiles, and they'd fuel 3, and 3 of them were unfueled, and then after the 20 minutes they would fuel the others. And defuel those, the ones that were fueled. So they never shot more than 4 of those 6 that they had on the site.
I see.
So 3 missiles would come at you.
Right.
And so we had very quick training at Nellis Air Force Base. First morning there,
Where is Nellis?
In Las Vegas, Nevada.
Okay.
And they showed us how the ejection seat worked. And they showed us how the equipment that we were going to work with, how it worked. And that was our academics for the checkout in the airplane, which normally you go through 5 or 6 months of academics and flying training.
This was a fast track. Yeah.
And so we finished this whole program in 3 weeks. We flew 13 flights. We worked. Strategic Air Command had these what they call radar bomb scoring sites, where the B-52s would come in and supposedly drop their bomb. When they pushed the button, there was a little tone went off, and they'd record that spot on the radar, and they score them and how many feet they were off on dropping the bomb.
Yeah.
And they had simulators of the SA-2 radars on those sites, and that's what we worked against for training.
Right.
Tried to home in on those and so on, and make the bomb run on them and so on.
So now, what plane did you fly?
The F-105. It's the bottom one over there.
And you were the pilot? You were a pilot?
No, I was an electronic warfare officer. I was in the back seat.
Okay.
And our pilots were quite experienced. My pilot had 1,500 hours in the F-105, so, and he was an instructor. The crew training for the 105 was at Nellis Air Force Base.
I see.
And they trained a lot of pilots to go to Vietnam.
Right.
And he was an instructor there, and had a lot of time in the airplane. And to me, he was an old fart. He was 37 years old. I was 29 at that time, so he was really old.
Yeah.
And anyway, we trained together at Nellis, and then we flew together in Vietnam.
I see. So when did you? So you went straight from Nellis?
Well, they gave us 2 weeks off for Christmas, and then they sent us over to Southeast Asia. And I was not stationed in South Vietnam. I was stationed in Thailand.
In Thailand, right?
Tak Le, Thailand. And we flew out of there. We flew across.
In January of '60.
You got there in January '67.
'67, yeah, okay.
Got there on the 20. I arrived at Tak Le on the 29th of January. Actually, I spent 2 weeks at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, waiting for transportation to Thailand. My pilot, being a major, he got out right away, but I had to sit there for 2 weeks. And when I arrived on the 29th, he was all excited to see me, and we were going to get to fly, and we flew the next morning. I arrived one afternoon, and 4 o'clock the next morning we took off.
Yeah.
And first thing happened after we took off, it was pitch black out there, and Thailand, there are not a lot of lights. It's no visual references outside the airplane. And just got off the ground, and there was in Thailand, and big bugs, rice bugs, came out of the air conditioning system, because when the gear comes up, it turns the air conditioner on. And that rice bug came out, and he says, "You got it." And so I'm flying that airplane from the back seat, and they had taken all my instruments out, except they had the little standby instruments on the side. They were about that big around, attitude indicator. So, I had to, just off the ground and with a heavy bomb load, try to maintain wings level and a positive rate of climb, and not stall the airplane. The airspeed indicator pegged at 400 knots, so I really didn't know how fast we were going. We were somewhere over 400 knots.
Yeah.
So, he was swatting that rice bug. Every once in a while, he'd hit the stick, and the airplane would wobble.
Yeah.
He finally got that rice bug and took over again, and so we made it through that one. But that rice bug really scared him.
This was your first day, huh?
Yeah. So, well, a little side note on that. I arrived that afternoon, and I went to personnel to check in. And the sergeant says, "Why don't you come back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock?" And I said, "Okay, I'll come back at 9 o'clock. I didn't know we were going to be flying the next morning. So it was after 9 o'clock before we got back from that mission, and I got there late, and the sergeant says, "What time did that tell you to be back?" And I said, "Well, 9 o'clock, but I was flying this morning, didn't make it back until now." And there was a major sitting there, and boy, he got all excited about this. And he said, "You mean you flew a mission and you hadn't been checked into the base yet?" So anyway, they put me on the fast track to get checked in at personnel, and so anyway, that was I was there for 3 months and flew. I got shot down on my 35th mission. I don't remember much about the final mission. We were not supposed to go on that one, or we didn't think we would. I was on my way, slept late that morning, was on my way to the officers club for breakfast, and somebody said, you better go down to base ops, they got you on the flying schedule. So I went down there, and we were on the flying schedule if they had 4 F models that were in commission, because we only had 4 of them on base. And otherwise, they had the single seat version, which were the D models. They had 2 pilots standing by to take those. We usually flew at least 2 F models and 2 D models. Or sometimes they'd send 4 F models. Well,
the F model was the single seat?
Was the 2 seat.
The 2 seat. The D model was the single seat?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And so, anyway, we didn't think we were going to go, and at the briefing everybody ordered hamburgers, and we figured we'll just wait till after the briefing and get our hamburgers. Well, they had 4 airplanes and 4 F model airplanes in commission, and so we went, and we got up to North Vietnam, and here's where my memory starts to not come back. I remember we arrived at, there was a ridge that ran into Hanoi, and we always flew down that ridge, and you could, if they shot a missile at you from one side, you could duck down to the other side to get away from the missile. And so we started down that ridge, and it was a solid undercast, and we were at 18,000 feet, which was, you know, much too high to be over North Vietnam, and especially over an undercast. And the next thing I remember was a missile coming out of the clouds, and it detonated right above the airplane. And I remember there was a bunch of holes in the canopy, and it was so much fire I couldn't see the instrument panel. And that's the last thing I remember until I woke up. I didn't remember pulling the handles or anything. I woke up in a bamboo hut, and a bunch of screaming Vietnamese, and they had stripped all my clothes off. I had a broken leg and had a big gash across the back of my head. Had a little scar right there. That at the time was doesn't look like much now, but that was a wound that stood wide open, and it was eventually got badly infected. My hand was swollen up real thick, and I had a whole bunch of little burn marks on the back of my hand, molten metal. Looked like molten metal had splattered on them. And had a broken leg. Leg was broken right there.
So you don't know how you got down safely from...
No.
You don't remember that. What about your pilot?
He didn't make it.
He didn't make it.
They returned his remains in 1983. And, you know, apparently they had him. His gear was tied to the truck that took me to Hanoi, so. And so... my helmet was tied to the back of that truck, and so was his. Right. So apparently he made it out of the airplane. And
well, evidently, I mean, he'd made it. He was okay enough to pilot the airplane still to a landing that you survived it. I mean.
Oh no, we ejected.
Oh, you ejected. Okay. So y'all both ejected.
Yeah.
So. Was it was an automatic ejection for you, or you remember ejecting?
No, it wasn't automatic. Most airplanes now, the seats are connected. You know, if one fires, the other one goes too.
Okay, so he ejected and you went too.
In the 105, they were independent. So.
But you don't remember the glide down or anything? You just remember the explosion and that was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now I don't know. I talked to some of the other people that were in the flight with us, and they said the airplane is completely disintegrated. And so, anyway, you know, I woke up
Yeah, go ahead.
Woke up in this bamboo hut with all these screaming Vietnamese, and you know they were hitting me with their fists, and they were spitting on me, and they were pulling and twisting my broken leg, and yeah, they were not very friendly to say the least. And when I woke up, they picked me up. I was on I guess. I'm not sure what I was on, but I guess it was on a bamboo stretcher. And they carried me outside, and they had a pep rally out there. And then it started raining. They took me back inside. And then I got sick to my stomach, and I was waving at them to get back. They didn't get back, and I puked all over them. So
That didn't make them much happier, I guess.
No.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then later on in the evening, the Army showed up, and they picked me up, and they carried me for a long way, and I was conscious and unconscious. And we finally got to a place where there were some lights, and I thought I talked to my pilot there, but I'm not sure. I had hallucinations and was in and out of consciousness and whatnot. And so anyway, at this place they put me on a Jeep-like truck. It was a Soviet-made vehicle, but the back of it was pretty much like an American Jeep, and the Russians copied almost everything we had.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I was laying in the back of this Jeep, and my broken leg was they had put a bamboo splint on it. It was sticking out the back of the Jeep, and every time they would come to a village, they would stop, and the driver there was a driver, and then there was a guard in the back with me, and the driver would get up on the hood of that Jeep, and he would whip up the crowd into a frenzy, and they would come hit me, pull my leg and whatnot. And
How many people were? How many?
well, I don't really know how many. It would be a crowd, 10, 15 people at least.
Yeah.
And they
Now,
had
these were North Vietnamese soldiers. I mean, Army now, right?
yeah, this is an Army. I guess he was an officer, and an enlisted guy was in the back with me.
Now, when you woke up, and those North Vietnamese that were around you then, were those regular Army, or were those Viet Cong, or?
No, those were just. This was in North Vietnam. They weren't
Right.
Viet Cong. They were.
Oh, okay.
They were just native villagers.
I see. Okay.
And one of the things they asked me when I first came to, they asked me if I was Russian. And so I suspect that they had Russian pilots flying in North Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Right before I was shot down, the proficiency of the MiG pilots picked up tremendously, and our intelligence said they were North Korean pilots, so I don't know. But anyway, they probably were told not necessarily all white men come out of an airplane are bad guys. So.
Right.
So probably should have told them I was a Russian. But.
Yeah, but then you had to speak a little Russian then, right?
Yeah. Well, they spoke very little English.
Right.
They did. They had somebody there that spoke a little bit, but not much
But
English.
you probably couldn't have faked your Russian, right?
No,
Yeah.
probably couldn't have either. So.
So
Anyway,
go on.
we spent that night driving, and the next day we got to a place where they stopped, and there was a doctor there, and he was a white doctor, and he looked a lot like Bob Barker.
Oh,
And well, like Bob Barker did in his younger years,
Yeah.
not like he does now.
right.
And I was later told he was supposedly Swedish, and he was a friend of Ho Chi Minh.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one that put the cast on my leg, And he told me that he had connection with the International Red Cross, and he could get a letter out to my family. And at that time, I wasn't really interested in writing a letter to my family anyway, because I didn't think I was going to survive. And then, of course, he wanted to talk about such things as what kind of airplanes was I flying and so on.
This was the doctor?
Huh?
The doctor
The
was
doctor,
asking?
yeah.
And he was speaking
English.
pretty good English,
Yeah,
right?
very good English, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I wouldn't talk with him, and that made him mad. So much for me getting to write a letter through the International Red Cross. Of course, I don't know if I would have ever been able to do that anyway.
Yeah.
So they put a cast on there, and then they put me back in that Jeep, and bouncing up and down that Jeep, it hurt just as much in that cast as it did without it. So, and we still stopped in the villages and the crowds. And, sometimes the crowd would get away from them. The guard would hit the people with his rifle, jab them with his bayonet. He never shot one, but he threatened to. And they were vicious. And probably the worst thing in the National Geographic, you've seen these pictures of these old women that chew the betel nuts. They have real red mouths.
Yeah.
Those were the worst.
Yeah.
They were extremely mean.
Wow.
Those old women that had that red mouth.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we went through all that, And so the next night.
Now, were you the only prisoner? This was just, you were the only prisoner there, right?
Yeah.
With them at that time.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
right. And so sometime late that next night, we arrived in Hanoi, and we arrived at what they call the Hanoi Hilton, which was the Wa Lo prison in downtown Hanoi. And they put me in an interrogation room, and they fed me breakfast that morning. It was some god-awful stuff. I later found out it was kohlrabi. It's sort of like turnips cooked in soy sauce, and a green soup and rice. And I didn't eat any. Well, I ate a little bit of the rice, and I couldn't eat much of the rice, which they'd give us a large plate, heaping pile of rice on it, and I could just eat a little bit of it. And I always wanted to be able to eat the whole plate, and by the time winter came, I could eat the whole plate, but right then I couldn't. And then the interrogator came in, and I was in and out of consciousness, and so they couldn't really torture me to get me to talk, because I'd pass out on them, and once you passed out, they can't torture you. And they kept telling me that if I didn't talk, they weren't going to give me any medical care, and I was going to die. And so we went through that for a while, and then finally I decided, well, I don't have anything to lose but my life. I talked to them. I figured since they had lots of 105 pilots, but very few electronic warfare officers, I just tell them I was a 105 pilot. Mm-hmm. So started off, first question, what kind of airplane were you flying? And I said, well,
okay, let me get that.
Well, that's what I started off, and he started off with, what kind of airplane were you flying? 105. He says, D or F? Of course, they were all versed on the D model and the F model.
Right.
I told him a D, and he says, you're lying to me. He says, I know you're an electronic warfare officer, and we just talked to your pilot, Major Dudash. And so, he knew that I was a 105 electronic warfare officer, so I couldn't hide that fact. He already knew that. And that's a common interrogation technique, is to make people think, that they know a lot.
Yeah.
So we went through a whole bunch of questions, and then really the only real intelligence type thing that he wanted to know is what were the targets. Well, we didn't know what the targets were, and he kept pressing, and finally I said, well, the Fukien Airfield and the Doomer Bridge and the Haiphong docks. And he says, no, he said, that's not one of your targets. He said, that's 6 Bravo, and that's Navy operational area, which they had was 6, had a route pack 6 was where Hanoi was in Haiphong. Mm-hmm. And it was divided up. Haiphong was 6 Bravo, and Hanoi was in 6 Alpha. And the Navy had responsibility for 6 Bravo, and the Air Force had responsibility for 6 Alpha. Mm-hmm. And he knew that too. So
yeah. And
then he got around to asking about, who were the people in my squadron? Well, I made up a bunch of names, and I'll be darned if he didn't pull out a piece of paper and he read off a list of names. He had the whole squadron roster, except 2 guys weren't on there. The 2 newest guys that had come in.
This is still the Swedish.
No. This is after we're at Hanoi.
Okay, this is after you're at Hanoi. Yeah, but this person that's talking to you is speaking English to you?
Oh yeah. There were some. They called him the Eagle.
But he was a North Vietnamese officer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever he was, they didn't wear any rank.
Right. Okay. But his main job, he was an interrogator.
He spoke fairly good English.
Yeah.
And there were some rumors that he graduated from Michigan State.
Really?
Yeah. So, he spoke pretty good English. And he was sounded, and he probably was the same guy. There was a radio program that we used to listen to before it got shot down. We called Hanoi Hannah, was similar to Tokyo Rose.
Right.
And this woman on there, there was a woman on there and a man, and this man sounded just like him. So I suspect it was the same guy.
Yeah.
And they used to play that program to us every night. We had a squawk box in each cell, and every night they would play Hanoi Hannah, and all the propaganda. They had some American music on there, and then at the very end they had this little violin music, and those that died but not for their country, and they would read the casualty list from the Stars and Stripes. And so, anyway, that was the interrogator. And then, of course, he was the bad guy, or the guy really needed some information. And then came a guy we call Soft Soap Ferry, and he was the good guy. And his interest was what were my political beliefs. Who did I vote for? And things like that, and then what was the status of my family. And they were very interested in the status of your family. And I pretty well stuck to telling who my parents were, who my wife was, and how many kids I had, and all that. But from there, I always varied the story. What my father did, and so on. And they were real interested in that to establish what social class were you from, and of course they were looking for someone that had political connections and so on, and like John McCain, when they found out who he was, all of a sudden they changed the whole operation of how they took care of him.
Right.
And because his father was the admiral. And,
exactly.
So anyway, and they called him the Prince. And so anyway, they were real interested in that. And this guy was fairly well educated. And I was telling him my father was a farmer. And what do you have on this farm? And I rattled off what all he had on that farm. And then he said, "Do you have any assets like buffalo?" And to this guy, that water buffalo that's going to plow the rice paddy was the only asset that you had on a farm. Now, he didn't understand the rest of it. So, and he was one of the more intelligent ones. Anyway, they left me there for a couple of days, and then they took me to a place that we call Heartbreak Hotel. And this was a real dungeon place. And it had 2 concrete bunks on each side with stocks at the foot of the bunks. But I was on a stretcher, so they threw me on the floor. I was still on the stretcher, but on the floor between the bunks.
How's your leg doing at this time?
Well, I still have trouble with it. The infection is still in there.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going. My wife doesn't like for me to show this. This is a steel pin they eventually put in it. It's a Kunstner nail. They use these in the States.
Right.
For people that have a break.
Right.
And except they leave the top of it sticking out of the bone, so that when the bone heals, they can go back in there and pull it out.
I see.
But mine was in so far they couldn't pull it out. And I came home, and eventually it migrated into the knee, and they pulled it out through the knee.
But that's the rod right there.
Yeah, this is the rod. I told the doctor when I went in there, I want that rod when you get it out. So they gave it to me. And
so go on. You were.
But anyway, when they brought me back from the hospital, I was waving it, and my wife still cringes at that.
I'll bet. Yeah.
And she doesn't like for me to show this to people. But,
right.
So, anyway, I was in there for, I don't know, about 3 or 4 days in this dungeon-like place.
At Heartbreak Hotel. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And
was this in Hanoi or just?
This is still in that prison. Yeah. This is just a different section of it.
I see. Okay.
We call the interrogation rooms. We call that New Guy Village, and then they had Heartbreak Hotel, and then another section of it they called Little Vegas, because most of the prisoners there were F-105 pilots, and they trained in Las Vegas. So, and they named the buildings after the casinos in Las Vegas. And so anyway, and then one night they came and got me, and they carried me to this interrogation room, and then pretty soon they brought in another American, and the interrogator sat down, and we got I think we exchanged names, and then that's about as far as we got before the interrogator came. And anyway, the interrogator came, and he said, "The camp commander has given his permission for you to be roommates." And so anyway, they moved us to this other section in the Wallow prison, which is the Little Vegas. And we were this guy's name was John Dermisi, and he was my first cellmate up there, first American I'd seen up there. And we were together, I guess we were there about a week and a half or so together. And then right after we got to the building we were in was the Golden Nugget. And so here's where we made contact with some of the other prisoners. One of them from the building across the way yelled to us one day and told us that, you know, they had a code up there how they communicated, and it was take the alphabet and eliminate the K, and for a K use a C, and then you take a 5 by 5 matrix and you put the alphabet across the rows, and so the first set of taps is the row, like A would be 1 1, which, and the second set of taps was a column in this, or Z would be 5 5.
Right.
And so that's how they communicated from one cell to the other, because the Vietnamese,
it was 5 across.
Yeah, 5 across.
A, B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
And F, G, H. Okay, got it.
And so then, you know, tapping on the wall and communicating that way. And he also told us, he said, Commander Stockdale is the senior ranking officer here, and here's his policies. Let's see, you know, don't give them anything unless it's under torture. Don't do this and do that. And let's see, I don't remember what all of them were. Don't escape unless you have outside help. Anyway, he had a number of policies that he had. And
now, was this the Stockdale that was the vice presidential?
Yeah.
That was Perot's vice presidential?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who just died recently?
Yeah.
Yeah, he just died a few months ago. Didn't
Yeah,
he?
that was him.
Right.
Yeah, he was the senior officer in that camp.
I see.
And so, anyway, and then, I don't know, a day or two later, they came and got me, and they hauled me to town to a hospital, and they took an x-ray. And I didn't think anything of it, and then about a day later, they showed up and said, your leg is not healing, and we need to do surgery. So they took me out, they cut the cast off, they shaved my leg and all that, and prepped me for surgery, and then they took me out, took me to the hospital, and at that hospital there were two, that same doctor that I had met out in the boonies, he was there, the one that was the Swede. And then there was another one, he had a sort of a Jewish type nose, and he was a white doctor also. He's probably Russian, I don't know. He spoke very poor English, but he did speak English. And they gave me some shots to knock me out, and I guess it was sodium pentothal. And they were giving them to me, and it wasn't knocking me out. And then they wanted to know how much I weighed, and I was going to convert that to kilograms, and I converted it the wrong way, and they gave me a shot to knock me out. So anyway, in the conversion, I converted in the wrong direction. So it gave them a much heavier figure. So anyway,
I didn't got a heavier dose.
Yeah,
because of that. Yeah, okay.
But anyway, the next morning, I thought it was still the same day, but my cellmate said you were gone overnight. So they brought me back to the cell, and we were there another day or two, and then they took us out to another camp. And so we went to this other camp, and then my legs started swelling up. And we were just, I think John and I were together for a day or day and a half, and they moved him out, and they took him somewhere, and then they came and got me, and they carried me to another cell, and I was in there with a guy that was also from Tockley. I didn't really know him at Tockley, but he lived, his wife lived in my pilot's house in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Anyway, he was there. He had a broken leg, and he also had a broken arm. And then there was a navigator, or not, he was also an EWO. He was from B-66. He was a young lieutenant that was with us, and he had to take care of the two of us.
Okay. How about the gash in the back of your head? How had that?
That eventually healed up.
Oh, it did?
And that healed up too.
Okay.
But, that was this is what had me concerned because my hand was all swollen up. But anyway, while I was there, they, I started noticing maggots coming out of my wound. Had a big cut about that long, and there were maggots in there. And I told the medic about it, and then he took the bandage off and he found them, and he got real excited about those maggots in there. And I had told him maggots, and that didn't mean him, but his word was worms. And he pulled them out with forceps and fussed about me letting them get in there and whatnot. And anyway, it was draining and it was a mess. And he went in there with forceps, and he ripped about that much of it open again, and all the way down to the bone. And he stuck the forceps up in there to get all the pus pockets to drain. And I stayed with this was Jim Haichu and Jack Davies. I stayed with them for, I think it was 2 days or 3 days, I guess it was. Mm-hmm. And they came pick me up again and took me to another cell. And they put me on a bunk in there, and there were 3 other bunks, and then pretty soon they brought in 3 other guys. And these guys were, 2 of them were EWOs, electronic warfare officers from Tok Lee that I had flown with at Tok Lee. One of them was shot down before me, and then I didn't know the other one was shot down. He was shot down a week after I was. Yeah. And then the third guy was he was a Navy what they called a limited duty officer. They made him, he was an enlisted man in the Navy, and they made him an officer. And he was never going to get promoted beyond lieutenant. Mm-hmm. And they were going to retire him at that. Mm-hmm. And he was 42 years old, so he was much older than the rest of us. The rest of us were about 29 or 30 years old. Yeah. And so, anyway, he was the older one, and he was quite a character. He was a big talker and had a lot of stories, and he's the one that nursed me back to health, and he was the one that, I laid on my back for, I guess they were shot down in April, and it was sometime in August, and, he finally decided that my leg was healed. It was still draining. And so he had me standing up, and I would stand up for 30 seconds and pass out. And I'd stand up, and, each time I could stand up a little while longer. And eventually, I got around to where I could walk, and they brought me some crutches. And I could hobble around with my crutches, and my leg was still stiff and very sore. But then they told me later that when they first came in there, they didn't think I was going to live, and then when they decided that I was going to live, they didn't think I'd ever walk again. So, but I made it through all that, and I was with these 3 guys for a year. And after a year, they came in and they got me, and they took me. And it was a section to that camp that I didn't even know existed over there. They took me over there, and I went to an interrogation. That was the first interrogation I had been to since I had been shot down, because I was always flat on my back and they didn't bother with me. They pulled my cellmates out and interrogated them every once in a while. It was more political indoctrination than an interrogation. So. But you had to be real careful when you went to those. If you said the wrong thing, they would either beat you, or if you said the right thing, you were talking to a tape recorder, and it was going to be on Radio Hanoi. So you had to be real careful about what you said, and did a lot of double talk and things that they didn't understand, and so on. And they didn't understand the concept of fat chance, or the extended middle finger. They didn't understand that. Some people that were photographed doing that, and a lot of double talk like that. It went over their heads, and so this was my first interrogation. I think these were interrogator trainees. They couldn't keep facts straight or anything. But anyway, I got through it. With some deer down there.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
Yeah.
I guess you see that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, they eat my wife's flowers. She doesn't like that. So, anyway, I went to this interrogation, and after that they took me to a cell, and there were 8 other guys in this cell.
Uh-huh.
And the guy, John Dermisi, that was my first cellmate, he was one of those 8 people. And they put me in that cell. And we stayed together. This was April of '68, and then we stayed together until May of '69. And in May of '69, Dermisi and one of the other guys escaped. And we had they had a big vent in the top of the room, and they had some barbed wire nailed across the vent.
Mm-hmm.
And we had been able to remove that, and so we could lift the guy up and he could get in the attic. And we had hidden all kinds of stuff up there. And then they went up through they lifted the roof was clay tile roof, and they lifted the tiles up and crawled up through the roof and went down the side of the building, but they didn't get very far. They were out for about 2 hours. And they brought them back, and of course then after that was a big purge and interrogation. I was fortunate that I was not one of the people that was picked. They picked 2 guys, and they put them one in one room and one in another room. And they started torturing them, and they had a list of questions to answer, and they worked on them until they both had the same answers. Of course, the only way they're going to get the same answers is to tell the truth.
Right.
And so that's how, they worked them over until they got everything, which one of the guys was in a cell where he could see another cell, and he, that 5x5 code flashing in front of an air vent sent out the message that all is lost. And of course, after that, they didn't really work on any of the rest of us in our cell. They went to the other cells, and by the time they got to these people, like the senior ranking officer was over in the other section of the camp, and we had not told him that we were planning an escape. And so, this hit him like a ton of bricks, and those people didn't know anything about it, and they almost killed one of those people over there. They were convinced that they knew about it, and they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, well, the guy they almost killed was the guy that was the communications link from our section of the camp to the other camp.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, his name was Red McDaniel. He was I think he was the last skipper of the Lexington, that aircraft carrier that sits in Corpus Christi.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
And he was the skipper of that after we got out.
Uh-huh.
And
yeah.
Anyway, they almost killed him because they were convinced he knew about it, and he didn't.
Right.
And then they got there was a major over in the other camp. Our side was all lieutenants and captains, and they almost killed the major over there that was the senior ranking officer of the whole camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they bricked up all the air vents. All of us in the cell were in leg irons and handcuffs, and they left us that way for 6 weeks, and they let some of us out. And then there were 2 guys in our cell that they moved all the senior ranking officers from all the cells in that section of the camp together, and they stayed in leg irons for a year.
Because you were in for 6 weeks.
Yeah. So, but anyway, they brought us back together, but we were still in leg irons.
Yeah. And
then they let us out, and then they shuffled the camp again. It was in about July of '69. And we ended up in another cell. I still had some of the same cellmates that I had before, and we had four new ones.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 that escaped and the 2 senior guys that they kept in leg irons weren't with us anymore, but they were right in the cell next door to us. The ones that were all the guys that were in leg irons.
What was your day-to-day routine like? I mean, what was were there a lot of days that nothing happened? They just fed you and nothing, or
Right. Yeah, there were there was a lot of boredom,
Yeah.
and and then the terror of going to an interrogation. And, they
Because an interrogation.
maybe once a month or once every 2 months you get pulled out for an interrogation, and that was always a terrifying experience.
Because it normally came along with a beating of some sort, or.
Well, if you weren't real careful, it did. Yes. You had to.
Did you ever get beaten just for the heck of getting beaten, or just?
Well, sometimes we had a turnkey that he carried a rubber strap cut out of a tire, like a fan belt, and he would go, if somebody didn't do right, he would hit them right across the face with that strap, and they would do that, and if you didn't, if you gave them any trouble at all, they would take a person out and they would lay them on the floor, and they'd have that same rubber strap, except it was about 6 feet long. And they would beat them with it until they lost control of their bowels and messed all over themselves. Then send them back. I never got that. I did have to, I got smarted off one time at an interrogation, and ended up standing on my knees with my arms up in the hot sun for 2 days. And every time I passed out, the guard would hit me with a stick until I got back up. So I did that for 2 days one time, for smarting off to interrogator. They were very, very easy to insult them, and boy, if you did, you paid for it. And there were some guys that used to do that regularly, and some of them didn't survive. And I don't know, one guy they were telling about, he told one of the interrogator told him that, he wanted to go to South Vietnam, but, he was needed in Hanoi, and he told him, he says, I think you're a coward. And they, I guess, just beat him almost to death for that. So, it was very easy to insult those people. So you had to be fairly careful.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, in September of 1969, Ho Chi Minh died on the 3rd of September of '69. And then all of a sudden, later in the month, I don't know, about the middle of the month or so, all of a sudden overnight, just treatment changed tremendously. They came and they knocked the bricks out of the air holes so we could get some air. It was just stifling hot in those cells. And, the summers there are just about like here, very high humidity and very hot. And in those cells, it probably got to 125, 150 degrees. And you could lie there, not move a muscle, and sweat would just pour out. It was that hot.
So, but your treatment got
better. Much better. Yeah, they gave us some air vents. They let us start writing letters home and getting letters from home. And I don't know, I was telling them this morning about talking about handwriting. My wife said when she got the first letter from me, she knew it was me because nobody else could write that bad. But anyway, they let us write letters. We got pictures from home where family, some people did. And the food improved, and the all-around treatment changed. There were no more beatings, no more torture. They occasionally had an interrogation, but wasn't any real hardcore type stuff. And they came along. Go back and talk about what the day was like. What we did was, we had all kinds of things that we did. We told movies, we told books, and a little side note there, and later on when we were in one of the big cells, it was a guy had been an usher in a movie studio in Trenton, New Jersey, and he told 200 movies in great detail.
Just told about the movies.
Yeah.
So y'all were actually able to go to the movies through other people's description of them.
Yeah. And I saw some of those movies later, after I got out, and he described it pretty accurately.
Like what was a movie, do you recall?
No, let's see, what were all the movies? Trying to remember the one that I saw that was. Gee, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah. That's a long time. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what the movie was that he. But I saw 2 or 3 of them that he had told. And,
so how long were you captive?
it was almost 6 years, from April the 26th of 1967 until 4th of March 1973.
And what do you remember about then? At the end, yeah.
Oh, the end? Well, yeah, I was going to tell you, the good treatment, and they moved us to a camp out in the country.
Right.
And they had bars on the windows, but, we had wide open windows, and they let us see the guys in the other cells and talk to them and things like that. And we were only there 3 months, and then one night there was a tremendous air raid came off. The missiles were flying in the air, and the guns were going off, and the airplanes were flying over, and we hadn't had any bombing since April of '68, so we didn't know what that was. And about 2 days later, they packed us all up and they took us back to Hanoi. This was a place a little ways out of Hanoi. Well, we were 7 miles from the Sante, the camp that the Special Forces raided, and there was nobody there. And that's where all that racket came from. So then they moved all the prisoners from all the camps into this place in Hanoi, in the big prison, except in the back of this, where they had Vietnamese before, they moved the Vietnamese out, and they put at that time there were 342 of us that were shot down in North Vietnam, Navy, Air Force, and Marine aviator type. And we were in this large section, and we were in 50-man cells. And this was the first time we'd seen this many Americans together in one place. So,
wow.
And a lot of these people we'd seen through peepholes and stuff like that. And when you're shaking hands with them, looking at it straight ahead, they look a whole lot different than they do through a peephole.
Yeah, sure.
And so, anyway, we had the large cells, and the senior officers were brought in there also. The lieutenant colonels and colonels, they were kept, entirely away from us. And, Commander Stockdale was later moved in with that group. So, anyway, they all in one camp, and that was the first time we'd all been together in one camp. We'd been scattered out to numerous camps. And, we still had our communication system and so on. And then in '72, when they started the bombing again.
Where was McCain?
He was in one of those cells. He was not in the one that I was in. But he was over there. He was originally in a camp they called a plantation. And at the plantation is where they had the people that they showed to the public. That's where they brought reporters and so on. And previously had been a camp that I was in. They called it the zoo because that's where they brought the reporters.
Yeah.
And put the POWs on display.
Right.
But then they moved that over to the plantation. And that's where McCain was.
I see.
And they had the collaborators over there and so on. And the people that collaborated with the Vietnamese.
Yeah.
And we had a bunch of those.
Right.
And that was not very nice.
No.
And there's still very hard feelings about that.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
McCain served honorably, and he caught a lot of grief because of who he was. Of course, he also got some good treatment because of who he was, but they also picked on him a lot too.
Do you know him?
No, I don't know him. I've met him once or twice after we got home, but that's all I know of him. So. And anyway, in '72, when they resumed the bombing, they took 200 of us to a camp on the Chinese border, and it was out in the middle of the jungle, but it was built. It was limestone rock buildings, and it was. We called it dog patch because the mountains in that area, they were the karst, the rocks that stood up. Of course, they were covered with vegetation, being such a tropical climate.
Right.
And so we call it dog patch, just like Al Cap used to draw the mountains in dog patch.
Right.
And so there were 200 of us up there, and we stayed there from May of '72 until January of '73, and we heard the rumors about the B-52 bombing and all that. And of course, at Christmas of '72, '72, they let us all out in the center of the camp, and we could visit with the other POWs, which was very, very unusual.
Sure.
And then they had a movie for us for Christmas. It was a propaganda movie, but wasn't a hardcore propaganda. It was more entertainment than it was a hardcore movie. It was a Russian Shakespeare play is what it was, but it wasn't in English. So. And anyway, in January, 19th of January 1973, they came and they hauled us to Hanoi, and we went back to the Wall O prison in Hanoi Hilton, which is downtown Hanoi. And they put us in there, and of course they let us all run all over it and talk to everybody. And the first group that went home, and the group I was in was the second group. We were in that camp, and then one night they had us out. They read us the agreements, that they had in Paris, and how we were supposed to be released. And from that the sick and wounded were to go first, and then it was by date of capture. And I was solidly in the middle of the second group. Depending on how many they put in sick and wounded, they had I think 30 sick and wounded. And so anyway, the February the 12th, the first group went home, and we were still there. And we were supposed to go home on the 26th of February. And then the day came, and the camp commander had us out in the courtyard, and he said, the United States didn't live up to the agreement, so you're not going home. So morale really sank, and things went on, and then things started picking up again. They started feeding us a little better. And on the 4th of March, which was a Sunday, the 141 showed up, and they took us out to Viet Airport and turned us over to the Americans there. A little story on that: the first group, they wanted them they lined up the POWs to walk up to the senior ranking Vietnamese. We called him the Rabbit because he had big ears. And salute him, and then step over and salute the American colonel. And they refused to salute the Vietnamese. And so by the time we were released, we were lined up. The Vietnamese, the Rabbit was sitting here, and he'd read our name, we'd step across the line, and there was an American colonel that we saluted, and he took us. And after that, he turned us over to a captain, grabbed my arm, and took me to the 141, and put me on the ramp of the 141. And one of my cellmates had talked about a nurse that was from his hometown. It was an Air Force nurse, and her name was Dawn Bradley. And when we stepped on the ramp of that 141, there was Dawn Bradley, which was sort of ironic.
Yeah.
But anyway, we got on the 141, and everybody cheered when we got off the ground, and cheered again when we crossed the coastline going out into the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah, okay.
And we landed at Clark Air Base in the Philippines. And we spent 3 days in the Philippines and came home, and they sent us to the hospitals closest to where home was. And I went to Wilford Hall over at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, and met my family there. And we spent 2 weeks in the hospital there.
I can recall seeing the TV coverage of, I guess that was the first group that was released of POWs.
Yeah. Well, they had TV
getting
coverage.
off the airplane and all of that.
Yeah.
Well, was your group?
We were on TV too.
Yeah. Okay.
They were all on TV.
Yeah.
And
as they came home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, here's some of the artifacts I had. Which, well, this is one of the bracelets, but this is a cup they gave me the first morning I was in Hanoi, and I had it all the way through. And this is Korean. and that's Vietnamese. And I don't know.
So that was your cup you drank out of, right there?
Yeah, had that for 6 years. And these were clothespins that they gave us, or paper clips, or whatever. But
and what was this? This is a bracelet?
yeah, this was one the bracelet.
This was your prisoner bracelet?
Yeah,
this is
the ones they sold here.
Oh, okay.
And people wore the bracelets, and they raised money that way for the POW MIA campaign.
Right.
And
this was the day you were shot down?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did your family first learn that you were? I mean, was there a time that they went not knowing about you?
Yep. I was missing in action from when I was shot down until September of '69.
And when they first got a letter from you?
Well, they found out a little bit sooner than that because one of the collaborators that the Vietnamese sent home early, he was really not a collaborator. His name was Doug Higdal. He was a Navy seaman, and he had fallen off of a Navy destroyer.
Yeah.
And he was in international waters where he fell off.
Right.
And a Vietnamese fishing boat picked him up. Well, they had him, and he was really not, technically not a POW because he was picked up in international waters, and they wanted to send him home. And so finally, the senior ranking officer over in that camp decided that, why don't you go ahead and play the game? And as far as I know, he didn't really do all the things that the other guys did. Wrote all those statements and confessions and all that. He played their game. He had memorized all the names of the people that were up there that they knew about, and a lot of other information. And they said when he finally got to the U.S. authorities, he wanted a tape recorder, and he talked for several hours into that tape recorder, rattling off all that stuff he had memorized.
And the names? The
names were one of those things that he had memorized.
I see. And yours was one of them? And that's when your family found out that you were alive and you were a prisoner? I'll be darned. But for almost 2.5 years, you were MIA for them, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
And you were married at the time?
Yeah.
Did you have any kids at the time?
Yeah, 2 kids. One of them was 5, and one of them was 1 when I got shot down.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
I was going to show you some pictures that I had.
What are these?
Those were the shoes they issued us, the Ho Chi Minh sandals made out of rubber tires.
These were your shoes for 6 years?
Well, I went through several pairs. But, the Vietnamese wore these too, but theirs had straps in the back so they could run in them. They didn't want us running with those.
Right.
So we didn't have straps in the back. And, these straps are inner tubes.
Yeah.
So.
Goodness.
They were, I think the tires, let's see. This one has some writing in it. I think that was Polish. I think they were from Poland, the tires. That's a 105 F model.
F-105,
Screen good.
Did you copy these from slides or prints or what?
From slides and prints, and some of these pictures came out of a book that one of my cellmates wrote. That book there, Prisoner of War, and he has a bunch of pencil drawings in there, and I copied some of those pictures. I don't know if it's. Oh, okay. Here we go. Let me. Okay, that was that's a drawing I did of the 5x5 code.
Right.
You know, that was telling you about.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Some people became very proficient at doing that.
Can you move it like this?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, with that arrow, we'll move it along.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
And that's John Blevins. He was an Aggie class of 61. We were on the same flight. This was in Hawaii on our way back to the States.
After, in 73, you mean?
Yeah, in 73, we were flying from Clark. We flew from Clark to Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, and then
So he was a prisoner also?
Yeah, there were 4 Aggies that were prisoners. One of them just died here a couple of weeks ago, and the other one used to live here in town. Jim Ray worked over there now in the foundation.
Yeah,
A&M Foundation. That's the room that we had to escape from. That was the steps coming out of it.
This is a drawing from that book.
And that's some of the artifacts that guys made dice. Some of that stuff was stolen, like the razor blade and the nails, and stuff that we picked up when we were outside and so on, that we used to make things. That was the camp in the mountains, and those pipes bringing the water in, they had springs up there, and those were hollowed out bamboo tubes.
Wow.
And we always had to bow to the guards. And bow cow was the word that we had to use to call a guard. And that's what our bunks looked like. Usually was a wooden pallet. It had a straw mat on it, and we had 2 blankets. And our clothes were wrapped up in. That's me coming off the 141. That's Admiral Naylor, the commander of the Pacific Forces. He greeted all of us when we came to Clark.
So this is you first time stepping on the ground?
Yep. Coming off that airplane from Hanoi. That's the clothes they gave us to go home in.
I can't imagine what might have been going through your mind right then.
Well, I was sort of confused. And it was another way we communicate from one cell to the other. Roll up a blanket like a donut and put your head in there and talk in a real high squeaky voice that carried better through the wall. And listen, that's some of the manacles they had. You put those on your wrists, and you couldn't twist or anything. And there's this downtown Hanoi. This right here is the Wallow prison at the Hanoi Hilton. And if you go to the next, well, let's see, yeah, that's still the same picture. You have a blow up in there somewhere of it. No, it'll probably come later. And it's, one of the things we did our exercises to stay in shape. At first, the Vietnamese, if they caught you exercising, would beat you. So we had to. There's our airplane, got my name on the canopy. So. And there's one in flight. Those are the Shrike missiles that homed in on the radar. And then that's the cluster bomb, and that was a fuel tank. And it had another cluster bomb and a missile on the other wing. And there's another shot at, there's a D model, single seat 105. That's on the tanker getting fuel on the way to North Vietnam. And it's just the flight. There's 4 flights of 4, and that was in the 4th airplane. So that's an airplane again, and a tanker. They're just repeats of those pictures. Yeah, that's the guards, and that's the one that telling you about the rabbit, the one that he was the highest ranking one there. He got demoted after the escape, but then he got back into position. He was political commissar or something. That was the stocks at the foot of those bunks in Heartbreak Hotel. And they operated them from outside. They could pull that rod, and then the stock would come up. There's a blow up of the Hanoi Hilton, which this is the entrance to it. And it had 2 doors that you went through, and then there was a courtyard. And these were administrative offices right here. And then they had that was New Guy Village right here. We're telling you about. And then this was where Heartbreak Hotel was. In that area, and then this was the Little Vegas, and then later on, after they had the raid at Sante, when they moved all 342 of us together, we were in this section back here, and this was a prison built by the French in 1925, and the outside walls were about 20 feet high, and they had glass on top, broken glass on top of them. And then they had a no man's land, and then the prison walls and everything open to the inside. So to get out, you had to get out of these cells, which were reinforced concrete, and then you had to get across that no man's land with the guard towers, and then get over the glass. So there's another angle of it. And that's what the rooms on the inside looked like. That's another drawing from the book. And that was these women had known my wife here in College Station. Their husbands had been stationed here, and then they moved to Hawaii. And
where was this taken?
That's in Hawaii. So, and they're standing on their knees with the guard behind them with the gun.
Oh, so this
to
is
get a guy to sign a confession or something.
So this is the position you were talking about for
right.
How long were you?
2 days.
2 after you smarted off?
Yeah. Yeah, those were in the big prison. That was the latrines. The 2 footprints and the hole. I understand at Narita Airport in Tokyo they have the same setup. That's an Oriental commode. Yeah, go back. That was the leg irons.
Right.
They
right.
very crudely made. They looked like they were made in a blacksmith shop. Hammered out by hand. And they would sometimes tie people to the bunks and sometimes tie their hands to it. They had all kinds of variations. And that's while we're communicating, watching out for guards. And the signal was, if there was a guard around, we would cough. A cough was a danger signal, and 2 coughs was all clear. And that's North Vietnam. There's a DMZ, and here's Hanoi and Haiphong, and I got shot down about right there. And that's meeting my wife in San Antonio.
Wow.
And that was mosquito nets. They did give us mosquito nets.
Your wife's name is Bobby? Is that right?
Huh?
Your wife's name is Bobby?
Right.
Okay. Mosquito nets.
The mosquitoes would carry you off over there. And then we also had if you could see the person, we had a code, mute code.
Well, yeah, that's the sign language for the deaf. A lot of it. I recognize that. Some of it is, not all of it, but some of it is.
Yeah. Anyway, we use that sometimes if you could see the guy, to communicate with him.
Yeah. You had to be careful with Q, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You had to be careful who was seeing that.
Here's another map of North Vietnam. And in some camps, that was our latrine bucket. And that was the torture technique they used on a lot of people to get them to talk. They tie their elbows and wrists together behind their back and then pull their arms up over their head. And they'd leave them for 15 minutes, and then there's a latrine bucket, put their shoes on there to sit on it, because they were real rough, rusty edges on that bucket. And they did give us 3 cigarettes a day. And their meals. That's the pagoda at Tak Lee, Thailand. That's the only picture I have of Thailand. The rest of them that I had didn't make it home with my stuff. And there's a guy tapping on the wall, listening with a cup, one of these cups. And that was at Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio when I came home. And that was another camp that I was in. This is the one that they had to escape from. This was what we call the annex, this part of it. And this was the main part of the camp. And see that little thing right there? That's a swimming pool. Except we didn't swim in that. We dumped our latrine buckets in it and they raised fish in it.
Yeah.
The swimming pool was there when the French had that. It was a movie studio. And I guess these buildings, the way they were set up, that's where they stored their film and chemicals. And after we left, they said they made that into a movie studio again, and then later on it was torn down into an apartment complex now.
Yesterday we introduced you to Alton Meyer of the Brazos Valley. He counts himself lucky to live here, lucky to live at all. Shot down, spent 6 years as a POW in Vietnam. After the explosion in the air, does not remember ejecting or floating to earth. The next thing he remembered was waking up, his leg fractured, on his back in a bamboo hut, the faces of the enemy looking back down at him.
I saw a whole bunch of very vicious Vietnamese, and they were asking me if I was Russian. And of course, I told them I was American. I probably should have told them I was Russian. But anyway, they became very vicious. They spit on me. They twisted my broken leg. I had a broken leg. I had cuts and burns and bruises all over my body. And they had stripped all my clothes off, which that was probably a good thing that I was unconscious when they did that, because some of the guys that were conscious when they took their clothes off, the snaps and buckles and zippers and so on really baffled them, so they just took the clothes off with a machete. So they say it was quite a scary experience.
His captors took him to Hanoi, but the trip there was one he'll never forget. It was just the start of his hell on earth.
Every time we went through a village, they would stop in the village and they would roll up the side curtains on the truck and let the villagers come look at me, and they would hit me with their hands and fists and twist my broken leg and things like that. And probably the most vicious of these people were the ones that had the red lips and teeth from chewing betel nuts. Those women were very vicious people, and they were really mean. As far as hitting and spitting and twisting my broken leg and so on.
Along the way, he was interrogated by a Swedish doctor. He won't forget that.
And he told me that he had connections to the International Red Cross. He could get a letter out for me. And, of course, at that time, I didn't think I was going to live anyway. So I really wasn't that interested in getting a letter out. And then he wanted to talk about things like what kind of an airplane did I fly, and I wouldn't tell him, and he got mad at me. And I don't know, I guess he was the one that supervised putting a cast on my leg, but they put a cast on my leg.
Yeah.
And then when I came to again, they put me on that truck again, and we started back toward Hanoi, and we stopped at all the villages, same routine as the day before.
I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo, Brazos Valley, brought to you by Meese and Associates. More with Al Meyer, POW, Vietnam, right after this.
If you are in need of legal services, please consider calling Meese and Associates, attorneys at law. Meese and Associates, an involved community partner. Meese and Associates, attorneys who care about helping you and helping our community. Call us at 846-9608. Licensed by the State Bar of Texas, not certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. Meese and Associates, attorneys at law. 846-9608.
Alton Meyer of the Brazos Valley, 6 years of POW in Vietnam. Interesting note here, at the Hanoi Hilton, the ranking American POW officer was Admiral James Stockdale. Yeah, the former running mate of Ross Perot, who just passed away this past summer.
Well, I just remember the policies that he had sent out. Don't give them anything without torture, and no escaping unless you have outside help. And his wife was the one that organized all the wives, which they had the League of Families, and they were the ones that sold the POW bracelets to raise money for the campaign and so on. And that probably helped a whole lot with our treatment getting better in 1969.
Tomorrow we'll finish the amazing story of bravery of Alton Meyer, Vietnam POW. I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo, Brazos Valley. Alton Meyer lives with his wife, Bobby, in rural Brazos County. He's thankful every day that he was able to grow old with his family, his children, his grandchildren. It may well have not turned out that way. Lieutenant Colonel Al Meyer was an electronics warfare officer. When his plane was shot down, he was captured. He spent the next 6 years as a Vietnam POW. Hi, I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo, Brazos Valley, brought to you by Meese and Associates, and today we conclude the story of POW Al Meyer. There's so much to recall about his years in captivity. 2 years his status was missing in action as far as his family knew. He remembers the interrogation in Vietnam.
When I got there, they try to do things to me and I'd pass out. And, you can't torture someone that's unconscious. And so they kept telling me that if I didn't talk to them, I wouldn't get any medical care and then I was going to die. So I held out for a while, and then I figured, well, I don't have anything to lose but my life, and so I'll talk to them. And I started to tell them that I That first question was what kind of an airplane was in. I told him 105, and then the next question was D model or F model, the D model being the single seat and the F model being the two seat. And I told him a D model because I had decided I was going to tell him I was an F-105 pilot rather than an EWO, because I figured they'd have fewer questions for a pilot than they would an EWO. Mm-hmm. And so he immediately told me that I was lying to him, because he knew that I was from an F-105F and that I was an EWO, and he had just talked to my pilot, Major Dudash.
The Hanoi Hilton was his home for a while. That's where the interrogation got more intense.
You would go to the interrogation room, you stayed there until they finished interrogating you, and then they would take you to what they called Heartbreak Hotel, and it was a real heartbreaker, because here you finally came to the realization of what had happened to you and so on, and I stayed there, I don't remember how long, 3 or 4 days, and I was lying on the floor, since I was in a body cast from my chest all the way down to the bottom of my foot.
Finally, after 6 years, Al Meyer was released, but even that was no smooth operation.
We were in a camp up on the Chinese border, and they took us to Hanoi. Mm-hmm. And we were in Hanoi, and they read the agreements to us that they had made in Paris about releasing POWs, and each of us was given a copy of these agreements. And so we knew when we were going to come home, pretty much. I was very solidly in the second group. They was going to be sick and wounded first, and then was going to be by date of capture. Mm-hmm. And so I was pretty solidly in the middle of the second group, depending on how many sick and wounded there were going to be, and I think there were 30-some sick and wounded. And then on February the 12th, the first group went home.
But for the second group, Al Meyer's group, well, there was a delay.
They lined us up in the courtyard one night, and the camp commander told us that, today was the day for you to go home, but the United States is not living up to the agreement, so you're not going to get to go home. And so morale dropped, and then about a week later, things started getting a little better, and on Sunday, March the 4th, the 141s showed up, and they took us to the airport, and we got on the 141s and flew from Hanoi to Clark Air Base in the Philippines.
We thank Al Meyer. We salute him for his service. We regret the 6 years lost. Please thank a veteran today. I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo, Brazos Valley.
If you are in need of legal services, please consider calling Meese and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Meese and Associates, an involved community partner. Meese and Associates, attorneys who care about helping you and helping our community. Call us at 846-9608. Licensed by the State Bar of Texas, not certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. Meese and Associates, Attorneys at Law, 846-9608.
It is 6 years that Alton Meyer will never get back, the 6 he spent as a Viet Nam POW. Now retired in rural Brazos County, Al Meyer has many memories and artifacts of being held captive in Hanoi at what they call the Hanoi Hilton. He spent his first several months on his back with his broken leg healing. Hi, I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo, Brazos Valley, brought to you by Meese and Associates. We'll start Al Meyer's story today, and it does start with why he entered the Air Force to start with, on advice of a friend.
Mm-hmm. Said he was out in the middle of a battle every day, but he had a nice, clean, warm bed to sleep in at night, so I figured the Air Force was for me.
Yeah, his job was to fly back seat as an electronics warfare officer.
Well, electronic warfare officer, most of us went to B-52s and sat in the back of the B-52 and operated the electronic defenses for the B-52, the jammers and things like that to jam the enemy radar. And that's what most of our class went to. I went to Air Defense Command and flew in B-57s, which was a light bomber. And our job was to fly targets for the Nike Air Defense missile training, and then also for fighter interceptor pilot training. We would jam their radars while they tried to intercept us and simulate shooting us down.
Stationed in Thailand, his very first flight actually came before he was properly checked into his post.
I arrived late one afternoon and went to personnel, and they told me that to come back the next morning at 9 o'clock. I went back down to the squadron, and they had us on a flying schedule, and we went flying. We got up at 2 o'clock that morning, and we had a 4 o'clock in the morning takeoff, and it was pitch black. We took off, and the air conditioning system on the F-105 doesn't come on until the gears retracted. And when we got off the runway and retracted the gear, there was a large rice bug came out of the air conditioning in the front cockpit. The pilot says, "You got it," and so I had to stick, and You know, it was pitch black out there. There were no visual references, and they had taken most of our flight instruments out of the back seat. And so I was trying to maintain wings level and positive rate of climb and not stall the airplane until he got through with the rice bug. And every once in a while, he'd swap the stick, and the airplane would wobble a little bit. And he finally killed the rice bug, and so we went on with the mission.
Al Meyer flew several missions over North Vietnam. He can't remember them all, but he certainly remembers his last one. It was mission number 35.
The target that day was an electrical switching station, which was in a building inside a dirt revetment, which we had tried to bomb 2 or 3 times before, never had been able to hit that building. And so we got to the beginning of what we call Thud Ridge, which was a ridge which sort of pointed toward Hanoi like a finger, and you could fly down that ridge. And if they fired a missile at you from one side, then you could dodge to the other side to get away from the missile. But when we got there, it was very cloudy, and we called back we were 4 minutes ahead of the mission lead and the mission commander, and we called back to him and told him that it was all cloudy, and he says, well, go take a look, there may be a hole over Hanoi. So I remember that, and I remember we were above the clouds, and the missile popped out of the cloud and exploded right above the airplane.
And that's the last thing he recalls, other than the torture, the camaraderie, the perseverance, and the family back home. They're all part of this amazing story of Al Meyer. It will continue tomorrow. I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo, Brazos Valley.